Rightio, today we're going to be chatting about a new brand on the channel, which is Mount to Coast. They are an ultra-focused Chinese running shoe brand. They've come through with a couple of different models, including the R1, which is a road-focused ultramarathon shoe, and now also the H1, which is a hybrid trail road ultramarathon running shoe with some pretty exciting midsole technology going on. Today we're going to chat through it top to bottom. We're going to chat about my experience, chat about the price, and also some comparisons to let you know exactly where this sits and whether this is the shoe for you. I've had this shoe for about 3 weeks now. I've logged 65K so far, even with a bit of a dicky Achilles in the past couple of weeks. So yeah, I've been a pretty big fan. Let's chat. In terms of some specs, we have 35mm of foam in the heel with a 6mm drop down to the forefoot. The foam that they're using here is their new Circle Cell midsole technology, which is a bio-based super foam made in collaboration with BASF. It is a pretty resilient, punchy foam, I would say, quite similar in feel to Lightstrike Pro, but I'm not sure whether it is an ATPU or a TPEE. They've just said that it is a proprietary foam, which I do think is in line with the modern day super foam. In terms of the weight, coming in with that 35mm stack, full coverage rubber, and then a pretty built up upper. We're coming in at 258 grams in my men's size 10.5, which is pretty impressive. Puts it at about 15 grams heavier than the Evo SL, around the weight of a Super Blast 2 in my size as well, which I'm pretty happy to see. Starting off with the upper of this shoe, I would say that it is a simple, effective, well thought out setup here. The heel counter has a good level of stiffness at the base, not overly padded back there, so you can get a pretty simple fit and lockdown. The tongue is gusseted in on both sides with a lace loop through the middle. Stays in place really nicely, has just enough padding to protect you from the laces as well. Lacing system, they are calling their tuned fit, which has 2 parts to it. You've got the laces at the top and then this adjustable slider setup at the bottom with the wire, which you might recognize from some of the Salomon shoes, I guess is where they're most popular. That is a really handy system where you can adjust the fit, kind of tailor it to the needs of your foot, have it tighter at the bottom, looser at the top, or vice versa. For me, I've been a pretty big fan so far. I have personally been doing the end of the midfoot up a little bit tighter to stop my foot from sliding forward, which has enabled me to loosen up the ankle collar and have a little bit more breathing room back there. In terms of the upper materials, we have this kind of suede-like overlay for the top half, wrapping around the eyelet chain and the back of the heel counter, and then that turns into a nylon mesh, almost like a fishing wire. It kind of feels like fishing line, sorry. Very breathable, quite flexible, no stretch at all. It does feel like it's going to be quite durable. Toe overlay also appreciated. If you're going to take this on the trails, I do think it is going to protect you at least a little bit more than your standard road shoe. In terms of sizing, I've gone true to size here for my Western brands. 10.5 has worked out quite nicely. Enough room ahead of the toes, about half a thumbnail here. And in terms of the width, I would say we're looking somewhat standard, maybe a little bit less room than you might get from the more popular daily trainers out there. So I would say standard fit, but in terms of what everyone's wearing, they've got the Evo SL, Nova Blast, Rebel V5, all of which have a bit more volume than what I would call standard fit. So it's not going to be as roomy as those, but for most people, I do think this is going to have enough room through the end of the forefoot, getting into the toe box as well, but I wouldn't suggest that this is a wide foot friendly shoe. Overall for me, I have been a pretty big fan of how the upper has worked. It's done a really good job of locking down. I like the adjustability. It's done a good job on some trails as well, which we will chat about in the ride section. Overall, it just feels really well thought out and well planned. It's come together nicely. Coming down to the midsole, this Circle Cell technology in the midsole foam has been really, really impressive. It's got a really nice punchy, deep, meaty response, which is very similar in feel to Lightstrike Pro from Adidas. I'm not sure whether this is a TPEE, as I said. I do think it feels most similar to this foam in terms of that guts, that rebound. The key difference I would say is that this doesn't have the same kind of initial softness or the kind of sink in. It does have a little bit more aggression, a little bit more pop, the way that I feel it, although it is pretty hard to compare when you've got a little bit less stack, and then you also have the impact of the outsole as well, which can dampen the effect to some degree. The foam is punchy, it's got that resilience, it does hold up over the long runs as well, it doesn't bottom out. I would say it actually gets better as the run goes on and the shoe starts to warm up and kind of flex up a little bit, starts to smooth out, which I've found to be really nice. The geometry is definitely less rocketed than a lot of people would expect. Certainly less rocketed than shoes like an Evo SL, which I think do rely on that kind of smooth kind of transition through your stride. This, to me, felt a little bit more bounce based, kind of focusing on hitting just behind the ball of my foot, kind of sitting just ahead of the midfoot, punching into that, letting the foam compress, decompress, and give me a nice like healthy rebound, which I found to be pretty simple to find. I do like the kind of more simple geometry here, fairly wide midsole base, no cutouts, no real gimmicks. It just feels simple and straightforward, which is a kind of sensation which I've really been chasing lately amongst a lot of kind of high stack super trainers, which I find to be a little bit clumpy, a little bit kind of cumbersome sometimes. This does feel like a little bit of a breath of fresh air compared to those. I do think some people might find this a little bit firm for their taste, especially if you have been getting around the Nova Blast and the Rebel. You really like that big soft compression and a bit more of that kind of marshmallow squish. You might find it a little bit brutal, to be fair, but for me, enjoying a lot of these more kind of nimble trainers, this has been fantastic. It's kind of that nice halfway point between shoes like the Adios 9 and the Evo SL, which I think a lot of people have been searching for. In terms of the pace ranges and also trail versatility, I think it's got it all. The only pace that I'm probably not taking this shoe for is those kind of all-out sprints, but then I'm probably going to spike up for that or use something that looks a bit like this rather than my daily trainer. And then probably on the other end of the spectrum too, to be fair, in terms of the really slow recovery runs when the legs are absolutely thrashed, this shoe is probably not offering that kind of caring touch. So either end of the spectrum, probably not got it, but threshold zones, tempo zones, marathon pace, felt fantastic, turned over really easily. Sure, it doesn't have as much stiffness as I would probably prefer from a speed shoe, but the foam has the response, it's light enough, and it feels stable and simple enough that I can just keep ticking it over. Marathon pace especially, I think was its kind of sweet spot. Tempo zones, I did find it warmed up a little bit underfoot, which I think could be down to the outsole, bit more friction, or maybe the insole, the way that it was interacting with my foot. I did find it warmed up a little bit more than I would like. Daily training zones felt fantastic. Long run, as I said, was probably one of its sweet spots as well in terms of the kind of gutsy feel of the foam and the reliability of it. Moving to the trails, I found it to be good as well. Dirt tracks, no worries at all. I think it does have extra grip compared to your standard daily trainer, so it is actually providing a bit of an advantage. But then getting into kind of light to moderate trails, I think it did a pretty good job as well. Sure, it's not going to be good for kind of bombing down technical hills or rocky paths or anything really muddy, but this grip length, which I would say is probably looking close to 2 or 3 mil deep, did a pretty good job on some gravel tracks and some kind of more light, sandier courses up on the farm. And I also did a lap of Bold Park here in Perth, which in terms of the actual grip underfoot, no problem. But in terms of bombing down hills, some slightly unstable surfaces, it did really nicely. So far for me, this has got to be one of the most versatile shoes that I've tried, mainly because it has that extra kind of weapon in its back pocket of being able to go on the trails reliably. And so for me, this is the kind of shoe that I would be packing in my suitcase, going away for a weekend, going on holiday, heading back up to the farm for a 2 or 3 day stint. If I've got to do an easy run, a long run, maybe another easy run, and then if it's a Monday, I might do a speed session. This is probably the one shoe that I'm going to pack, maybe alongside the Mega Blast. But again, I would think this would have it covered on the trails if we're going to take it on anything moderately technical. So far, one of my favorite shoes this year, I'm going to say it straight away. This has been a really pleasant surprise. I think that the kind of build quality and the kind of simplicity of it give me a really nostalgic feeling. This is the kind of affection that I have for some of On's shoes, if I'm honest, where they feel kind of simple, straight to the point, but they kind of don't feel like they're absolutely begging for your attention. And I think that's a kind of similar style that I'm getting with Mount to Coast. They keep things simple, they put in what needs to be there and don't put in anything extra. There's no noise. They're not telling you all of the amazing things that the shoe can do in terms of like, you know, this is your super trainer, then you're going to pair it with your speed trainer, then you're going to pair that with your easy recovery run. They're not wanting you to grab this entire lineup of shoes. They just made a shoe which I think can do everything really nicely in a nice lightweight, high quality package. Really, really big fan so far. I can't wait for this to come into Australia. This is going to be a shoe that I recommend to a lot of people, whether you are just looking for an all-rounder super trainer, which has a bit of extra grip and durability, or you live on a farm and you need a bit of gravel road running support, or if you're a FIFO worker and you go up to a mine and run on gravel roads and you need something to pack in your bag for the week or for the weekend, that could be a fantastic pick. Or if you're just looking for a trail running shoe, honestly, this is going to do most of what people need here in Perth. And for most trails, I guess, if you're just doing kind of simple, more kind of focused trails, fire paths, all that kind of stuff, this could do perfectly fine. Very, very happy so far. This will be making it into some of my top lists at the end of this year. I kind of already spoke about it, but the grip underfoot has been quite good. They're calling it their Versa grip. I'm pretty sure this is a CPU. The kind of texture seems about right. It does have a little bit more stickiness than I have felt with some of the other Chinese shoes that I've had, which I also suspect to have CPU. So far, grip on the road has been good, and I think the key here is that it doesn't feel too clumpy or too big. It doesn't feel like you're running around in a pair of football boots, which are clumpy and hard. It does kind of integrate nicely. It's pretty similar zones, I would say, to something like the Aeroglide 3 Gravel from Salomon, where it feels grippy enough on the trails to be useful, but it doesn't feel clumpy when you take it on smoother tracks. As I said, grip on gravel has been good. Trails, light to moderate, I think it's going to do just fine. Durability wise, CPU has a good reputation. So far for me, even doing some pretty fast sessions where I do land hard on the outside edge, and you can see some of those lugs would be very prone to wear, I'm not seeing anything really at all. Or maybe a tiny bit of scuffing right in the corner, but so far, been pretty impressed. I can see a little bit of kind of foam damage or kind of foam compression from a few rocks coming through, but I'm not too worried about the aesthetics of it. I think the durability here in terms of the outsole should be pretty good. I guess we can kind of throw in a bit of a conversation around the midsole foam. It's a little bit tricky here because they have obviously made the bold claim around twice the durability of PIBA, which they are suggesting could be like 600. So this should hypothetically last 1,000, 1,200 Ks, which so far I can definitely see why, because, you know, it feels very similar to Light Strike Pro, which is notoriously durable. People are getting 800 Ks out of Adios Pro 3s. So far, I am seeing a bit of creasing, which I don't really think in this case is something to be concerned about. I think it's more just the range of motion that the shoe is moving through, rather than the fact that the foam is kind of compressing down and dying out. So my gut tells me that it's still going to last quite nicely, but my eyes are saying a bit of compression, which can be a warning sign for some people. So make of that what you will. I think this is a shoe which I will continue to rack up Ks into. I would like to get this to 100 miles. It will obviously depend on how much training I can do in the future with my Achilles on the way back, but yeah, not a bit of a no answer there really. I feel in my heart it could be good, but we'll have to see. Coming around to the price point here in Australia, the shoe is yet to release kind of officially. They do have their global store, which does ship free. So 280 bucks is what you can pick it up from there, although it is pretty much sold out right now, which is inconvenient. I know a lot of you would be excited to pick this up straight away. Still yet to come into the Australian market. I'm pretty sure it's 160 US dollars, which sounds pretty good. If that was to convert straight over to Australian dollars, we'd be looking at 240. So fingers crossed that we could have another shoe which sits alongside the Evo SL, doing very similar things with the added bonus of the outsole grip and a better upper and a bit more of a stable feel. So I will hold out hope for that, but if it is $280 when it does come officially to Australia, I'll also be pretty happy with that. As far as I'm concerned. $40 more than the Evo SL for those upgrades, as I said, I think is fair. $40 less than the Super Blast 2, sorry, and then $60 less than the Mega Blast. I think that stacking in terms of performance does make sense. So yeah, 280 bucks, if that's it, I'm happy enough, but I'm holding out hope that we could have a really nice bargain on our hands, which should sell really, really nicely. Rounding things out with a couple of comparisons just to finally position this in the market for you. I think the best place to start would have to be the Evo SL, which I've been mentioning so far. Probably the most similar shoe on the market right now, which is very high praise for this shoe. I think this does feel a little bit softer, a little bit more rocketed, a little bit more, I would say, bouncy in the more conventional sense, whereas I think this feels a bit crispier, a little bit more poppy, I think is the better word. A little bit less rocketed, more of a bounce-based ride out of the forefoot. Couple of areas I do think the H1 dominates though. The upper, much better fit here, much more adjustable, much more secure. A lot of people were falling off the midfoot cavity here with a bit of a sloppy fit. That's probably the main complaint with the Evo SL so far, is that the fit is just pretty tricky to find. A lot of people just can't get along with it, even though it is still obviously a very good shoe. In terms of the stability, better here, more surface area, wider base, and a little bit more of a simple geometry. Obviously a little bit less stack does mean that it doesn't come across quite as protective and kind of, yeah, bouncy and soft, but I do think for some people the stability will be a big factor which pulls them over to the H1. Outsole grip, I do think the Continental is reasonably durable, but on off-road surfaces, on the gravel, this doesn't have a heap of purchase. So if you are looking for something for farm tracks, gravel tracks, a little bit of trail stuff, or you just want something with a bit more bite, I do think the H1 could have that as well. Price wise, 240 versus 280 right now. For me, that money is worth it. That $40 upgrade I think could mean a fair bit of difference. But for a lot of people, it's probably not going to make a huge difference if you're just running on city paths. So I'm going to say it's pretty much balanced at that price point. I think they've done a good job of spacing it. Bring things back, even though I probably would be going for the H1 over the Evo SL just with a better fit and the outsole durability. And for me personally, obviously subjective here, I do just like a little bit more of a flatter forefoot, bit more of a kind of punchy ride. That's been my preference lately compared to the rock ring of some shoes, which I find kind of traps me in my stride a little bit longer. Feels like I've got longer ground contact time, which is not something I enjoy the sensation of as much. Still one of my favorite shoes, don't get me wrong, but I think the H1 for me so far has just edged out the Evo SL with a few of those other factors. I did bring out the Adios 9 mainly just to demonstrate a point that I think that the H1 does a good job of kind of bridging the gap between the Adios 9 and the Evo SL in terms of really flat flexible geometry and more of a kind of stiff rocketed high stack feel. I do stand by that. I think that this is that kind of nice bridge between. Obviously with the outsole grip, it does come across a little bit different, but I think that if you enjoy either of these two shoes from Adidas, you should enjoy the H1, with this being a little bit more protective, a little bit more rocketed, but then a little bit snappier and a little bit more direct than the Evo SL. Another gravel road running shoe to compare would be the Salomon Aeroglide 3 gravel, which I do think up until now was probably one of my top contenders for the gravel space. Is very protective. I like the TPU foam's kind of resilience, very gutsy, very kind of structured, I think was the word I kept on using. Does hold up really nicely over the longer runs as well. It's got a bit of pace to it. You can get into up-tempo daily training paces pretty happily. But in terms of the bulk of the midsole and a little bit of extra weight, I do think the H1 does take over in terms of versatility and in terms of that kind of all-rounder zone. For me, now including the trails. Definitely still a very good shoe. I think you can find this on discount around the place, which I think could be a sub in for the H1 until it arrives here in Australia. But for me, the H1 is definitely more of that kind of super trainer all-rounder compared to just a solid daily training all-rounder shoe. Final one to mention, more as a kind of throwaway comparison, is the Agravic Terex Speed Ultra, also from Adidas. Light Strike Pro. This is kind of the same basis for the comparison to the Evo SL, but I think that if you enjoyed the Agravic's feel, that kind of density, a little bit more of a light lug setup as well, which could work on the road perfectly fine, I think you shouldn't have any problems getting into the H1. Right now, I would be considering both of these equally if I was heading towards a gravel road ultra or something with a little bit more of a kind of smooth path where I'm not having to do anything technical. I think both of these shoes would be considered equal for me right now, which is, yeah, a big compliment to the H1 because I did absolutely love this shoe. So yeah, overall for me, the Mount to Coast has been one of the sneaky hits of the year so far. I would say it's definitely in the running for kind of all-rounder of the year. I really like the ride. I really like the versatility of the outsole. I love what that brings. And I also love the attention to detail in the upper. And I kind of just love the vibe of this brand, the attention to detail, the quality, and the kind of simplicity that they're bringing. This is the kind of shoe which I feel like I could use happily day in, day out for a lot of different runs in my week. And I could just get rid of this entire shoe collection and stop doing shoe reviews. So yeah, been a pretty big fan so far. I'm very happy with how these shoes have come through with both this and the R1, which I will get a review out for soon. Excited to see them grow into the Australian market. Keep an eye out, they shouldn't be too far away. Very excited by this so far.